Hello everyone, this is Christy from MyScrapbookEvolution.com. I recently shared with you my method for taking photos of my scrapbook layouts and craft projects. Today I wanted to share with you how I edit those photos. So you can see this folder is from my Layout a Day projects. I already have some of the photos edited. I always save 2 copies of my layouts. Essentially, this first copy here, you'll notice the name is Image 4160. That's the original copy. It's the original large size that was edited in Photoshop Elements. I save a smaller size of the image for use on my website and in galleries. And I've named that a little bit different so that I can tell that it's the one that I want to use on my website. What you'll also notice are that I have a lot of these unedited photos of layouts here. There's 2 different layouts displayed here, and I've taken several shots of each. I like to take at least 5 photos of each layout. I want to make sure that I get the right image for editing. Sometimes my camera doesn't focus the way that I want it to. And this can especially be a problem if you're using the autofocus on your camera. You want a photo that has a fairly crisp, readable title, and that your focal photo or focal point of the layout is relatively crisp and clear. And as I go through these, I don't know if you can see it on the video, some of them are better quality than others. Now here is kind of interesting. I try to take my photos in natural lighting, but sometimes a cloud is going by overhead. So this photo has a little bit of a bluish cast to it, and the next photo is just a little bit brighter. So evidently the sun came out for a second. And you can see that here as well. This looks like a good candidate for me to edit. It has a nice crisp title, and my focal photo seems to be pretty well in focus here. And you'll notice that even though I take these photos square on, sometimes I have a little bit of a slant. I always do things crooked somehow. But we can fix that in Photoshop. Again, I'm using Photoshop Elements. Let's just open the file. And it looks like I chose image 4405. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to straighten this layout a bit. So I'm going over here to the straightening tool on the left side, and I'm just going to draw a line along the bottom here and straighten that. Now sometimes your camera gets a little wonky. I had already put this picture off center, so I think the camera was trying to compensate a little bit. This especially happens again if you use autofocus. So the next thing I need to do is I need to crop my photo. I'm going to select the crop tool, and I'm just going to draw a line. Now it's really easy to crop when you're using one solid piece of pattern paper or one solid piece of cardstock. Occasionally what happens when you take your photo, part of it will be slanted a little bit. It's not exactly as square as you want. There's a couple of things that you can do for that. One, you can come here into Correct Camera Distortion. It's found under Filter. And when you open this, you're going to see a menu here on the right, and we're going to be using this section down here called Perspective Control. Now it does have sliders. I prefer to use the little numbers window. I can add it in increments of 1, 2, or 4. You don't want to work with really big numbers because then you're going to get a very drastic slant to your layout. And you can see that happen here as I move the slider back and forth. You can see how the layout is flattened and then goes to a slant. So again, that's just kind of an extreme. Let's bring it back down here to 0. Now for the most part, my layout is relatively flat, but if I want to play around, I can add increments of 1 or 2 in positive amounts and just work on changing the horizontal and vertical perspective of my page. Actually, I kind of like that better. Once you get everything the way you want it to be, you can hit OK, and it saves it for you. You can do this before or after you crop, because sometimes when you crop your photo and it does have a slight slant to it, you're going to accidentally get edges of the border here. This is just the black foam core board that I take my layout pictures on, but sometimes it shows through. So using the correct camera distortion will help get rid of that. You can kind of play around with that until it disappears. But if that doesn't work the way that you want it to, you can also use this tool here. It's the spot healing brush tool. So if you click on this, actually we need to have the image cropped, you'll see that accidentally I've got some of this border showing through. And if I take my spot healing brush, I can start to get rid of that. Sometimes it works better than others. I always work with small amounts at a time. Now, of course, this is over exaggerated. Usually when this happens to me, it's the very smallest sliver. Maybe I didn't cut a piece of 12 by 12 pattern paper exactly straight, you know, when you're cutting that little tab that the manufacturer has off. But this is a way that you can correct that if you have just a slight little sliver showing. Of course, my layout is fairly square. I'm going to just hit undo and go back to the crop. Because I used my tripod and I also used the correct camera distortion option, I've got a very square flat layout. So it's very easy to crop. I just move that, and if I need to, I can move, I grab these handles on the side and move the square around. You'll notice that sometimes when I crop, I don't exactly line it up flush to the edge. This prevents what I was mentioning before, where you might have a sliver of that foam corkboard show through. And now my layout is essentially cropped and ready for any additional editing I want. Now I can use some of the tools up here in Photoshop to enhance it, change lighting, but I get a little lazy and I actually just like the ease of using Totally Rad Lab. And this is where Totally Rad Lab shows up. I can actually move this little window around, but I keep the tab up here and all I do is click on it and it's going to bring up all of my options. I can add better lighting, I can make it darker, I can warm up the layout. If it's a picture that I'm editing, I can even add filters of all different sorts. All of these options are here for me. Black and white conversions. Of course, with a layout, you're not going to be adding a lot of those extra filters. You may want to play around a little bit with sharpening, and you can see the different options for sharpening here. But as you can see, some of them are a little harsh. And when you're submitting to design teams or to magazines, they don't want to see a lot of extra editing. So you probably don't want to overly sharpen or overly, add too many filters. You just want to do the bare minimum to make it look as natural as possible. Now, because it is a cloudy day for me, I'm going to turn the lights on a little bit, but that's a little too intense. It's a little too bright. Over here on the right, it shows your current recipe, and you can add as many filters to this as you want. It just adds them here in a list, and you can turn them off and on with this little checkbox here next to lights on. And you can also control the strength with the slider. Since this is a little strong, I'm just going to bring it down a little bit and get it about where I want it to be. I can also add a couple of other filters here. Again, I don't want anything too intense. Let's see what these look like without them. And of course, if I add saturation, you know, I can add or remove saturation, play around with the highlights on it. Whatever I want or need to do to get the layout looking the way that I desire it to be. So it looks like, for the most part, this is all I'm going to need to do. If I use any of these other filters, it's just too much. Actually, I might try this one. And again, if I try something and I don't like it, I just shut it off. There we go. I like it this way. I'm going to hit finish. Now it has been applied to my layout. All I have to do is flatten the layer, and then it will allow me to save it. Now the first save, I just leave the original image name. That again is the original image straight out of the camera, with the slight edits, of course. But I want that original size because if someone comes back and asks me for a different size for their blog post, if they want me to share something with them, I want to be able to easily change the size to whatever they specify. I am going to go ahead and resize my image. I just come here for Image, Resize, select Image Size, and I'm going to take it down to about 600 pixels. Makes it approximately 600 by 600. And I'm going to save it. I'll click Save As. Load. Let's see, this was layout number 11. And that's just how I'm going to save it right to my files. If I come back here, I can see it saved this image and a copy here as well. And I'll just delete these other ones because I don't need them anymore. And that's how easy it is to edit a layout to put on your website or for a gallery.